So my talk is about my impressions of what is key for investors in New Zealand when they look at startup and early stage biotechnology companies.
I'm at the dog end of this extremely interesting session, which I found extremely valuable already. And that's what I'm going to try and address, what investors are looking for, and definitely with a Kiwi view of things. So I'm going to talk to you particularly about what the investors that I'm involved with are looking for here in New Zealand. But we'll start off with me, just so you understand who I am. I have a medical background, particularly in neonatal infection. I have an academic background. You can read biochemistry, immunology, blah, blah, blah. But I also have a business background. And back in the mid-90s, I started my first biotechnology company, which was the first of 3 in a row that I ran. I've also worked for 2 venture outfits. So I've also worked on what some people call the dark side. I don't really understand why that term's used at all. I've then become a lovely term, entrepreneur in residence at Imperial College, and that was before actually I was headhunted to Pacific Channel, where I'm an executive director. And to go on to what Pacific Channel is, some of you will have heard of Pacific Channel. We're actually not based in Wellington, we're based in a little city slightly north of here, beginning with A. And we describe ourselves as a venture development and investment company. And I use those words quite carefully. We are not a venture capital fund. We do not have a fund that we decide what to invest in. What actually happens is we do 2 things. We love to start our own companies, but also very frequently young companies come to us and ask us for help. And help includes help with management, help with strategy, but almost always help with fundraising. And we go out to our network of investors on a company basis to raise money for the companies that we are working with. We specialize in dairy and life sciences and clean tech industries, and we definitely do not do anything in IT. We don't understand what IT is. We are a seed co-investment partner with the NZVIF, the government fund of funds, so that always helps us raise more money, because if we can raise a big chunk, then NZVIF will often chip in with the same quantity of money. And finally, we're quite proud that we're in that particular space that I told you about, life sciences and clean tech and early stage. We are number 1 in New Zealand. We raise more money for those type of companies than anybody else in New Zealand. And usually, if you look at the statistics, and they're all available from NZVIF, between 20 and 33% of all money raised in that field comes through us. So that's what we do. So let me now go on to the question, and I think you can understand why maybe I know a little bit about it, but just like you, I'm still learning. What investors are looking for, and each of those has got a slide coming up. So let's start with innovation. So we are certainly looking for innovation. It's actually incredibly important. And so from an investor point of view, we're going to ask you, is your idea, you're saying it's innovative, but actually, is it really innovative? It's a big world out there. I know you probably know no one else in New Zealand is doing it, and maybe you know that no one else in Australia is doing it. But is someone in China doing it? Or has done it? Has someone in the States done it? Is it actually really innovative, or do you just feel it's innovative? And then, just what do other people think it's innovative? And the particular important other people are these KOLs, which is an investor term, and that is key opinion leaders. So one of the things, if you're going to come to look for investment, the investors are going to go to the key opinion leaders and say, well, what do you think of this idea? And even if you happen to be right, but it's such a crazy idea that every key opinion leader thinks it's crazy, you won't get investment, because you've just been too bright. So the way around that is to talk to the key opinion leaders before the investors do, and convince them that you've got a brilliant idea. Proprietary position, which actually means which means patents. Right? I know it doesn't actually mean patents, but from a practical point of view, from the investors that I deal with, it means patents. And either the first or second question from any investor is going to be, what's the patent position? And if you haven't got one, you will not get investment from any investor I know. They're just going to really need that. And they're going to need that because they're putting in their own money and they want to know that your idea is protected and nobody else can do it. And that's what a patent can achieve. And I say can achieve because it doesn't necessarily achieve that. Patents can go in claiming something which actually is slightly different from what you're trying to achieve. So it may be a misconceived patent. There may be a problem with what's called freedom to operate. This actually is a very important point. You may invent something and you may patent something, but that may need another process or technology to actually be commercialized. And that other process or technology may be owned by another company. So you may be prevented from actually selling your technology by somebody else who owns another patent, and therefore you do not have freedom to operate. Again, there are ways around. You go to the other guys and say, can I have a license? Can I use your technology? But arrange all that before you go to the investor, because otherwise they're going to say, hey, you know, you've got a problem there. Or is there prior art? And prior art means somebody's thought of it before and published it, either through a patent or either just because they talked about it or it's in some academic paper. And we recently had a company come to us who actually they'd put in a patent and it was all going fine, but actually we had an analysis done of what they'd done, and 20 years before somebody had come out with that gizmo, you know, and actually you could just read about it. So eventually that patent would be useless because there is prior art. And then there's more than the patent, there's a strategy. And I won't go into details, but there does need to be a strategy behind your whole patenting process. I'd love to go into that, but it just takes too long. And then I do feel as if I'm repeating some of the things that John has said, but this actually is very important. If your investor hasn't asked you about intellectual property first, they've asked about management. And most seasoned investors, it says so here, most seasoned investors would prefer to invest in a second-rate technology with great management rather than the other way around. Because in the end, the one with poor management will fail for all sorts of management or other reasons, and the guys with the good management will buy that company or that technology. So management is really incredibly important, right up at the top. And there's tons of studies to show that good governance and good management makes a huge amount of difference to outcome. And as you've already heard from John, if you're doing something for the first time and being involved in a business for the first time, you probably haven't got the experience. So recognize that you don't have the experience and surround yourself with people who've done it before and know what they're doing, and get as much advice as you can. That really is incredibly important. Know what you don't know and get advice. And quite honestly, good advice does cost money, and that's something that not everyone in this country quite understands. You do have to pay for good advice. Competitive advantage. And again, we've heard a little about this. And it's, again, what is out there. And it's not just what's out there. If you've got a product that's only going to be marketed in 10 years, you've got to have a reasonable idea of what's going to be available in 10 years. You might have a great idea, but someone somewhere else might have had an even greater idea and be working on it. So it might sound good, it might look good, but actually when you start doing the analysis, somebody else is doing something even better. So in fact, from a competitive point of view, you're at a disadvantage. So it is worth taking the time to understand what the competitive landscape is. And you really have to be honest. You may just be pushing a technology that isn't competitive. And even if it is competitive, as you heard before, is anyone actually going to buy it? And this is really complicated. People get this wrong so often. People will go and ask, I'll go out to the anaesthetist and say, do you actually want this? And they'll go, oh, yeah. But they don't really want it. Actually, if you drill deeper, there isn't a market. So you have to be very, very careful about thinking whether there's a market, or knowing whether there's a market, or having good evidence whether there's the market, and really have a solid basis for understanding why people are going to buy whatever you're trying to develop. And if you've got all that sorted out, you need a strategy. This is a long list. It's getting longer, but this is all the stuff you've got to pull together if you want the best chances of raising money when you go to an investor. So a strategy means just that. What actually are you trying to achieve, and really knowing why you're trying to achieve that. And then asking yourself, actually, will an experienced businessman buy that strategy? Does that actually make sense from a business point of view? And in doing so, it's well worth trying your strategy out on a number of different experienced businessmen. See if it, test it. If you're a scientist, you test things, so test out your strategy. And then you've got to, I think it's a good time at that point to ask yourself, if you're a young entrepreneur or an older entrepreneur, is this actually what I want to achieve? And it's worth asking yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I trying to start a company, or why am I trying to see this technology being developed in some way or another? Because you've really got to know why you want to do it, because your why and the investor why may be extremely well aligned. It may be completely different. And if they're different, you're going to get the sort of problems we heard about that John was talking about. If you've got a strategy, then you need a plan. How are you actually going to achieve that strategy? Is it understandable? Someone who only understands one syllable, can they understand your plan? It's very important. It's got to be a very clear plan. And is it a focused plan? And does it actually achieve the aims of your strategy? And believe me, I've read stuff where the strategy says one thing and the plan takes you off in a different direction. It's got to be well thought through. And by the way, when you've got a plan, it's well worth sticking to. It's very important. Don't change the plan unless there's a really good reason to do it. I've met people who go, oh yeah, that's my plan, until tomorrow, and he goes, oh, I've just had another idea, let's do that. That kills companies. Financials. You've got to get to grips with the numbers. When you tell an investor it is going to cost $500,000 to get to whatever, they won't believe you. They never ever believe you. They'll immediately think it's going to cost double, and they are usually right, just from experience. So get help in costing out a plan and really understanding what your financials mean. And I've seen business plans where the numbers don't add up. I mean, literally, someone's done the Excel spreadsheet and got the wrong, got it wrong. I mean, that happens. But so really make sure, okay, that's, in a way, that's crass, but make sure everything in your financial package adds up. Does your plan fit with the financials? Because again, I've seen that too. So make sure it adds up in every way. And understand where it's going to get you. There's this nice term that, again, investors use called value inflection point. Does the money that you are trying to raise really generate value? So at the end of that phase of the project, do you actually have something a whole lot more valuable than before you started? And let me give you a practical example of that. We're currently raising money for a prostate diagnostics company called Caldera Health. And the last lot of money they raised, which was a little over $500,000, was the plan was to do a study on human samples. And that's what they did. They actually achieved their milestones. So we're now raising money saying, the study is done. Here are the results. The results are fantastic. It's 100% accurate, but so that's even better. But so they have generated value, because when you say 100% accuracy in 105 individuals, then investors go, oh, actually, that is interesting. That is worth something. But if you've got to the point where, say, you raise the money and you collect the samples, but you don't do the tests on it because you run out of money, you didn't raise enough, and you haven't reached that value inflection point, and you've wasted a load of money. So make sure you raise the right amount of money to get your company to a more valuable place. Exit. Anyone who's done anything with investors knows this word exit. And what it means is, what the investors want is to put money in your company and a week later get 100 times back. You know, that's what every investor wants. Now, of course, that's not quite achievable, but that gives you the idea. You know, that would be unbelievable. But does your story actually achieve something like that? They want to make money. You know, that's what investing is about. So does your plan and your strategy and your science and your intellectual property all add up to this story where the investors can actually make money? Because if you can't convince them that there's a good chance that they're going to make money, they're not going to invest. So they want to know how they're going to get their money back. And they want to know how much. Now, of course, you can't tell them, but you can put out projections and show them how it might all work out, and they can sort of believe you. But exits are kind of difficult things. If you sell your company for 10 times or 100 times or whatever, you know, in 2 years, the investors are going to be incredibly happy because then they get money back. You know, it's more complicated than that because these days sales actually aren't necessarily one lump sum. They're kind of downstream payments, but you do get a big lump at the beginning, and that's lovely. That's what investors want, but it can be quite difficult to achieve. We heard a little bit earlier about licensing deals. Licensing deals are a bit of a problem for investors because, okay, there'll be some money at the beginning of that process, but actually you're talking about license fees which come in over the life of the, you know, maybe 10-year life or even longer of whatever product this is. And that's an awful long time to wait for an investor. You know, they want to see money coming back earlier, but it's better than nothing, and there are ways of turning that into cash. You can sell royalty streams. So it is an exit. And then if you talk about IPOs floating on the stock market, investors tend to laugh at you because in this environment it is incredibly difficult to actually achieve a flotation. Not impossible, but you tend to have to be generating quite a lot of profits normally to be able to float in this day and age. So that's what investors are looking for, just as a sort of brief overview. But just a couple of other points I want to talk about, which are not what they're looking for, but are very important. And that is stage and valuation. What stage is the company at, and how much are you worth? So whatever stage you're at, and you talk to an investor, they'll say, oh, if only you'd done that one extra thing that you said you were going to do, we'd invest in you. That's a very common story. And there's no right or wrong way to do this, but it's either you've got a compelling story and they'll invest in you, or they won't. But you'll never find complete satisfaction for any investor at which stage you are. And here, for those who are starting companies, I'm sure you're at a very early stage. Don't let that put you off. Just try and find the right investors who are really interested in taking those very high risks at that very early stage. And then what are you worth? Valuation, there's a market, you know how much milk costs. There's a market for milk. If milk went up, so very much, you stop buying it. You'd start doing something else. Everything has a price. And if you're starting a company, there are others like you starting companies. Even in New Zealand, there are others of starting companies, and there's a price, and the price goes up and down. At the moment, the price is pretty low for companies that are not making a profit. And you have to understand, investors know what the price is. There are various ways of trying to calculate the price. I mean, when companies come to us, we use 3 different, well-recognized methods of valuing a company. But in the end, there's a bit of a gut feel about this as well, because investors have done it before, and also we raise money for quite a lot of companies, so we know what actually is going to work and what's not going to work. And that may not align with your ideas, but I'm afraid if you're going to get funding, it's going to be whatever the market price is. And And please bear in mind, if there's no proof of concept, and the Caldera Health example is a good proof of concept. Now they have done a trial in humans, shown in the test that the first 105, show great results. That's proof of concept. If you have less than that, do not expect your company to be worth a lot of money. Certainly worth something if it's a good idea, but don't have inappropriate expectations on valuation. So that's about all I'm going to say. There's my contact details, just to say we at Pacific Channel, we love to help start companies. We love to help existing young companies succeed. So thank you very much for your attention.